I'd like to call to order the regular joint meeting of the Minnehaha County and Sioux Falls Planning Commission. And I'm going to begin with a few introductory comments. If you haven't already done so, please silence your cell phones for the meeting, for the courtesy of all those that are here. The two planning commissions work together on land use and zoning matters within the rural and surrounding area of the city. This area is displayed on the screen soon. It will be. That's not it. There it is. It's in the blue. After information and testimony is presented on the agenda, for the agenda item, the members will discuss the matter, and then each planning commission will vote independently to arrive at a decision. Any final action taken on the conditional use permit will take effect 5 working days following this meeting unless a written appeal of tonight's decision is filed in the county planning office by Wednesday, December 3rd at 5 p.m. When the joint agenda is complete, the City Planning Commission will adjourn the meeting and will continue as the County Planning Commission considers items beyond the joint zoning jurisdiction. I should have started by saying it is kind of confusing, I think, sitting in the audience. There's 2 bodies acting here. Jesse chairs for the city, and I chair for the county side. We're going to take separate motions on the same items and take actions on it that way. So at this time, let's see, we're going to consider there are no, consent agenda item is the approval of the minutes. Any objections to the consent agenda?
Move for approval.
Second.
So motion and a second to approve the consent agenda, which is the minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. The regular agenda consists of a conditional use permit for a solar energy conservation farm, and that is approximately 1 mile west of Sioux Falls on 268th Street. And do we have a motion to approve the regular agenda?
So moved.
Second.
A motion second for the regular agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Okay. So with that, David, are you in the hot seat to come up and explain this item?
Yes, David Heinold, Planning Department. We have conditional use permit 14-44 to allow a solar energy conversion system. As you mentioned, this is 1 mile west on 268th Street of Sioux Falls. It's roughly halfway between the Country Acres subdivision and Sioux Falls suburban residential, as you can see on the map here. Cherry Creek Solar is a subsidiary of Geronimo Wind Energy, LLC. They submitted a conditional use permit application for the Cherry Creek Solar Farm, or a commercial solar energy conversion system. The applicant is requesting approval of a conditional use permit for an SECS in order to accommodate for the anticipated project timeline, which has been attached for your review in the narrative. Due to the lengthy development process and need to have insurance of the permitting for the marketability of the solar site, it's preferable for Cherry Creek to receive a longer time frame for commencement of the proposed solar energy conversion system. The estimated completion date is scheduled for December 2016, and the applicant has also attached detailed information in the form of a preliminary site plan, which shows the general footprint layout of the project. If we skip forward just ahead here, here's the site plan. Shows the general footprint and layout of the project. As you can see, it would come off 468th would be the rough entrance to where the project would be located. And if I back up to the location map, as you can see here on this inset map right here, they would be interconnecting with the existing utility lines that Excel runs at 41st and Ellis Road, which is about 1 mile to the east of 468th Avenue, which would be about a half mile to the north of the site, which would be that line, and that would be mostly consists of underground cabling and wires. The project summary covers roughly approximately 99 acres. The entire parcel is 140. The site was selected based on significant landowner interest, interconnection suitability with utility lines, optimal solar resource potential, and minimal environmental impact. The planned output for the project is up to 10 megawatts of solar capacity, which would generate enough energy to power roughly 2,000 homes annually. The solar farm is proposed to utilize typical 300-watt photovoltaic panels, centralized inverters, and a linear axis tracking system or a fixed tilt racking system for the site. The panels themselves will be approximately 4 to 6.5 feet long by 2 to 3.5 feet wide, 1 to 2 inches thick, and to the extent practical, the foundations will likely be a steel-driven pier in the ground. Additional geotechnical soil tests may need to be completed to determine whether concrete foundations will be required for the solar panel arrays. The areas of bare ground at this facility will be revegetated with a low-growing plant seed mix, i.e. clover, short grasses, or flowers, low-growing forbs, low-growing wetland seed mixes, or some other low-growing perennial cover. Internally, the panels will be connected electrically to meet at a centralized inverter, which will convert the DC power to AC power. An on-site transformer will step up the voltage to meet the interconnection voltage of 34.5 kilovolts. The project, as I mentioned, plans to interconnect with Xcel Energy's existing 34.5 kilovolt distribution system via an approximately 1.5 mile, 34.5 kilovolt underground collection line. As shown on the map, this line will be buried underground from the project site, continue north along 468th, and then head east on 267th, or otherwise known as an extension of 41st Street, and then to the mile and connect with Ellison 41st Street as where the existing interconnection or the transmission grid is. And just a brief timeline of everything that's happened over the past couple of months. Dan Hine and 30 other members of the public appealed the decision of the joint Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County Planning Commission on conditional use permit 14-44, as you may recall, to allow a solar energy conversion system, or SECS. Several property owners have submitted letters of concern about the impact the proposed project will have on aesthetics of the landscape, property values, roads, and visual sight. The letters also indicated concerns over whether this is the best use of the land, proximity to residential homes, unsightliness of a 6-foot-high chain link fence around the perimeter, long-term maintenance, and the resale value of their own property. On October 3rd, 2014, staff discussed with Jordan Burmeister and Nathan Franzen of Geronimo Energy of Cherry Creek about an update that they are continuing to meet with landowners to address the concerns that members of the public have about the project. On October 16th, staff discussed with Mr. Burmeister about an update that they're working on developing a landscape plan, which they have provided with some plan examples from a nearby nursery that's actually just to the southeast of the subject property. The plan would include rows of lilacs, maples, red cedars encompassing approximately 8,282 linear feet on the outside edge of the security fence as shown in the site plan and the landscape plan, which is included for your review. He added that they are continuing to work with the landowner who is the property owner or Klein Properties of the subject property for the amount of land to be cropland around the proposed solar site, and a visual buffer of trees on the subject parcel that would be around the fence. On October 24th, Geronimo submitted the landscape plan, which is included in the packet, as well as a decommission plan on how a preliminary decommission plan on how they plan to remove the solar panels from the site at the end of its lifespan, which would be approximately 25 years. Staff discussed the conditional use permit with Pat Doyle, the Wayne Township Supervisor, and mailed notification of this Planning Commission hearing to him. Mr. Doyle stated concerns over the impact on the tax base, the roads during construction, and the siting of the Dakota Access Pipeline, as you may have heard, from North Dakota to Illinois. On October 24th, 2014, staff received the following comment about the impact on the tax base from the Director of Equalization. Since Cherry Creek Geronimo plans to sell the electricity generated from the solar panels to Xcel to distribute locally, then the property would be centrally assessed at a rate yet to be determined. CUP 14-44 was heard on October 28, 2014 at the joint Sioux Falls City Council and Minnehaha County Commission, but remanded back to this body right here, the Joint Planning Commission. Just some of the criteria that we go through in determining the approval of conditional use permits within the zoning ordinance. The impact of the proposed use on adjacent properties shall be a major consideration. The proposed use should be generally compatible with adjacent properties and the other properties in the district. Other than the visual impact of the panels themselves, the proposed solar farm should not have a detrimental effect on adjacent properties. It should be assumed that a majority of the impact will be during setup and the commissioning process itself. However, solar energy conversion systems typically have a much lighter effect on surrounding properties as well as the land itself than wind energy conversion systems, for example. During operations, few acts or disturbances of peace should be expected due to the minimal maintenance required for a solar farm project of this scale. The applicant plans to use panels that are specifically designed to capture the maximum amount of solar energy. Therefore, there will be no reflection of any kind on any adjacent properties. On November 4th, 2014, staff received a written response from the Director of Equalization regarding the proposed impact of the value increase or decrease of lands if a solar farm is placed nearby. To value properties, you must have sales of equally affected properties, which there are none since this is a first for the state of South Dakota. This statement would indicate that without more information, the value of these lands cannot be determined. 2, that the measures shall be taken to ensure that the proposed use does not alter the general character of the area or neighborhood. The general character of the area is primarily agricultural, with approximately 10 single-family dwellings and 3 farmstead sites within a 1-mile radius. The project site is located halfway between Sioux Falls suburban residential development and the Country Acres subdivision, which, as you can see, is shown on the map just to the west. The proposed location for this project is on approximately 80 acres of productive agricultural ground. It is depicted in an area lying adjacent to Sioux Falls municipal growth area. While this area is not likely to see a significant change in land use, however, it is expected that it will occur over some point, that some development will occur over some point during the approximately 25-year time frame of the SECS. 3, the effects of noise, odor, traffic, air, and water pollution and other negative factors shall be eliminated or controlled through the use of screening, setbacks, and orientation. There should be little or no negative effects because the site was selected based on significant landowner interest, interconnection suitability, optimal solar resource, and minimal environmental impact. At a minimum, the petitioner should be held accountable for any damage to public or private lands and roads. In addition, there may be a need for a requirement included on the permit for dust control on the portion of 468th Avenue or 268th Street, for that matter, that will be utilized during construction of the facility. The applicant indicated in their request that they are willing to work with the necessary parties to ensure that the effects of the project are minimal, if any. Screening could be a possible requirement to help ease residents concerned about the visual impact from their homes. As I mentioned, the applicant has been working with neighboring landowners to develop an ideal screening method for the visual impact the proposed project may have on surrounding properties, which has been included for your review. And while it may be difficult to determine the amount of noise generated from the transmission lines themselves or transformers, it should not be at a level that would otherwise constitute a nuisance for surrounding properties. And lastly, the proposed use shall not adversely affect the public. The applicant sent out a courtesy letter to inform nearby residents about the proposed solar farm project and what to expect from this innovative development in their area. Cherry Creek plans to utilize either fixed-tilt solar panel modules facing south or linear axis tracking system that would face east in the morning, perpendicular to the ground during midday, and west in the afternoon. In either case, there is a potential for a visual impairment of the view from residents' homes, but should not adversely affect the health, safety, and welfare of the general public. Just a couple of things that I'd like to go through as far as the standards for review of commercial solar energy conversion systems. That they are permitted in the A1 agricultural, C commercial, I1, I2, I industrial, RC recreation conservation by a conditional use permit, and that they're not allowed to have any advertising signs, but they are allowed one project identification sign that is not to exceed 25 square feet. That they must complete an interconnection agreement with an electric utility, and that they have to obtain all locally required road permits for construction and identify all the state, county, township haul roads that will be used and notify the appropriate governing body if the haul roads identified are acceptable. The governmental body shall be given adequate time to inspect the haul roads prior to use. Where practical, all weather roads shall be used to deliver all other heavy components. The permittee shall, prior to use of the haul roads, make satisfactory arrangements with the appropriate governmental body for maintenance and repair of the haul roads. Permittee shall promptly repair private roads, easements, or lanes damaged when moving equipment or when obtaining access to the site unless otherwise negotiated with the affected landowner. That the permittee shall utilize all reasonable measures and practices to control dust, which is included in the zoning ordinance, so take that into consideration as far as the conditions that would need to be added if the permittee shall develop a stormwater pollution prevention plan and soil erosion sediment control plan prior to construction. At a minimum, this would address things like erosion control measures, identify degrading construction and drainage of roads, necessary soil information, detailed design features to maintain downstream water quality, and that they have a comprehensive revegetation plan to maintain and ensure adequate erosion control and slope stability, and to restore the site after temporary project activities, and measures to minimize the area of surface disturbance. And the plan shall identify methods for disposal or storage of excavated material. All solar farms must be in compliance with all local, state, and federal regulatory standards, and the permittee has to submit a decommission plan within 120 days of completion of construction, describing how the process will be involved in decommissioning. And that this should include the manner in which they have to ensure that they have the financial capability to carry out the restoration requirements when they take effect. All commercial solar energy conversion systems shall be deemed inoperable if it has not generated power for 12 consecutive months. Upon expiration of this permit, or upon earlier termination of operation of the SECS, the permittee shall be obligated to dismantle and remove the site. All electrical generating equipment overhead and underground cables, foundations, buildings, and ancillary equipment to a depth of 4 feet. To the extent possible, the permittee shall restore and reclaim the site to its pre-project topography and topsoil quality. All access roads shall be removed unless written approval is given by the affected landowner requesting that one or more roads or portions be retained. Any agreement between permittee and affected landowner shall be submitted to the county planning department prior to completion of restoration activities, and the site shall be restored within 18 months after expiration. And if necessary, the planning department may include provisions that ensure that the applicant has the financial resources for decommissioning, which may be in the form of an escrow account that the project developer would deposit funds into over the life of the project. However, the financial provision should not be so onerous as to make the project unfeasible. And just some of my recommendations: staff finds that the proposed project meets the goals and policies of the 1998 Comprehensive Development Plan. So staff recommends approval of conditional use permit 14-44 with the following conditions. 1, that the solar energy conversion system, SECS, be entirely enclosed in a 6-foot-high fence, gated and locked. 2, that if dust, mud, dirt, or other debris causes a nuisance to adjacent properties or is brought onto 268th Street and 468th Avenue, all driving and parking areas will need to be hard surfaced in conformance with Section 16.04 of the 2002 Revised Joint Zoning Ordinance for City of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County. 3, that stormwater pollution prevention plan and soil erosion and sediment control plan be submitted to the planning director prior to construction. 4, that a landscaping plan be submitted prior to construction and all landscaping shall be maintained in a live state and all noxious weeds be controlled. 5, that the applicant shall follow the proposed construction phases of the SECS as submitted to the planning director. 6, that a building permit is required prior to construction of the SECS and installation of any signage. 7, that all signage be in conformance with Article 17 and Article 17A of the 2002 Revised Joint Zoning Ordinance for the City of Sioux Falls and Minnehaha County. And with that, I'll entertain any questions that you may have.
Mr. Chairman, I have one. Now, are we mainly hearing this again because they want a longer period in which to build, or is this just penance for us for it the first time? What is it?
We're hearing this again because the landowners within 500 feet were notified in Lincoln County that weren't notified of the last planning commission meeting. So this is a re-notification meeting.
Other questions? Thank you, David. In the interest of time, we definitely want to be able to hear all arguments pro and con. Oh, yeah, I will. We'll get there. We are going to hear from the petitioner, but I also wanted to state early on here is that we are dealing with land use issues here, and so tonight we're interested in hearing all arguments pro and con for this conditional use. But we do want to try to avoid repetitious testimony, and we would also like to try and hold maybe the arguments for and against about 20 minutes with a little time for rebuttal. So first we'll hear from the petitioner, and then we'll hear from others that would be in favor and those opposed. Hopefully there's a spokesman or a spokespersons for this, so that we don't need everyone to stand up and to testify. Again,
Mr. Chairman?
Don't want to hear redundant things. Yes, sir.
Just a point of order, there are more chairs in this room.
Yes.
I see 5 or 6. If people in the overflow room
In the back, you
want
can't
to come
avoid
in,
it.
there's a few chairs here and there.
So at this point, would the petitioner please come forward? You can state your name and address and tell us a little bit about your project.
Good evening, Commissioners. Jordan Burmeister on behalf of Cherry Creek Solar LLC, subsidiary of Geronimo Wind Energy LLC, doing business as Geronimo Energy, 7650 Asheville Way, Suite 725, Edina, Minnesota, 56543. 55435. Appreciate the opportunity to speak to you again on this conditional use again this evening. David did a very good job of presenting the details on the project, the history, the timeline of the project. Since the last time, we have heard some of the concerns by some of the neighbors, landowners, about visual impacts, and also a decommissioning plan as well for the assurance, once the project is at the end of its useful life, that it is going to be decommissioned in an appropriate manner. So we want to point out that we've gone ahead and went through with our proposal of a landscaping plan. We've provided that to the staff, and that's in the reports as well, as presented. We felt that that's a very good balance of trying to mitigate any potential concerns any neighbors have. In addition to that, we have set back the site plan from those neighboring houses as far as possible on the subject property, to help that in addition as well. As far as the decommissioning plan, we've went ahead and provided that language well in advance of what the ordinance requires, which is generally 120 days following construction. So we've done that, been forthright of presenting that as well, and what type of plan that's standard for solar projects. So just wanted to make those points clear, and we have been visiting with the neighbors to hear concerns and make sure that we can address those. And myself or Tina Rattel, my colleague here, would be happy to answer any additional questions you might have on the project from our company.
Any questions we have with it? Yes, sir.
Jordan, what will the setbacks be on the south and the east?
On the south, let's get a site plan here again for reference. From the panels to the center of the road on the south side, 530 feet approximately, and then from the east it will be from the actual home site up to the property line to the east, 464 feet to the south home site there on the east side, and then from the northern home site on the east side, I don't have an exact dimension of that, but I would assume that would be about 300 feet or so behind Grove that's just west of that home.
Thank you.
Questions?
Mr. Burmeister, you mentioned in the decommission plan, which, to your point, I do want to note going above and beyond and submitting that at this phase of the project. Talks about the feeder lines that would be connected to the power grid being abandoned. Do you know approximately how deep those are going to be?
Generally, those lines are 4 to 5 feet, at least below frost level. So, it's down below that, and that's standard. For any even wind farms, with any collector feeder lines, would be left in place below the frost level. As far as that goes.
Not being an electrical engineer, but if the site became something else later on, can that be reversed, so to speak, in that could become a very plausible underground electric feed into a neighborhood or otherwise? Can it be reversed?
Sure. I guess our line from the corner of 41st and Ellis Road, that'll be a buried line about 1.5 miles to the site. With it, if it's Excel, I guess if it's tying into Excel, this would be, I guess, technically outside of Excel's service territory, so that, I guess that would have to be evaluated
To be
at that
determined.
time. So,
Just a thought.
yeah.
Any more questions of Joe?
Commissioners?
Nate?
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak on behalf of this application? At this point, we'd open it up to the floor. Again, I'm hoping that maybe we have a couple spokespersons that might want to come forward.
Thank you. My name's Mike Schaefer. I'm a lawyer here in Sioux Falls, and I represent 14 of the landowners and neighbors of this facility, 3 of whom live in Lincoln County directly across the road on 468th Avenue. Cherry Creek Solar LLC was formed on August 26, 2014 as a Delaware LLC 3 days before it filed its application with the Planning and Zoning Commission here. According to the information that Geronimo and Cherry Creek submitted, neither of those entities have ever operated or built a facility of this magnitude. In fact, Geronimo has said it has 400 kilowatt solar installations on 10 slumberland stores in the Twin Cities metro area. That's the extent of its operative ability that it's shown to date. This is a proposal to essentially cover 99 acres with solar panels on that essentially quarter section of ground. Now, in its application to the commission, Cherry Creek and Geronimo touted the fact that they are in a process with a project with Xcel Energy in Minnesota called the Aurora Project. And that's a project to essentially build 20-some solar farms in the state of Minnesota, required by Minnesota law because Xcel Energy and other power companies are required to have renewable sources of energy. Well, it turns out that the Minnesota PUC forced Xcel Energy to sign a tentative agreement with Geronimo for this solar energy production, but Xcel has, in this last month in October, has filed objections with the Minnesota PUC, and I've submitted documents here, including newspaper articles and filings with the Minnesota PUC, where essentially Xcel has taken the position we don't need the additional energy. Our energy demands are not that great, number one, and number two, we found other sources of solar energy that are cheaper, so they're asking to get out from their deal.
Mr. Schaefer, can I ask you, how does that relate to this parcel?
It relates to this parcel because, in particular, the ordinance, the joint ordinance here. Oops. Sorry, that's right. the joint ordinance here requires, and that's 15.09 subsection 2 subsection 3, that there has to be an interconnection agreement with an electric utility. That's a requirement of your ordinance before this can be approved. Now, the ordinance doesn't specify when does this interconnection agreement have to come into existence, but in its proposal that was submitted with its schedule, Cherry Creek said they're going to have a signed interchange agreement or power purchase agreement with XL Energy by January of 2015, which is, what, a couple months away. So we question whether they'll ever be able to comply with that requirement of the ordinance, and we submit to both of you that there should be a condition imposed on Cherry Creek, if this is approved, that they have to have an interchange agreement or power purchase agreement consistent with your own ordinance, either by the time that they've scheduled, listed on their schedule, January of 2015, or certainly before they start construction. Now, I don't know if they're ever going to get an agreement with XL Energy in light of what's happening in Minnesota, but I think it's a serious question that you don't just build this thing, under the field of dreams theory and they will come, because they have to have that agreement by your own ordinance in effect. It must be completed, and Mr. Heinhold indicated that was one of the standards that had to be met to issue this permit. Now, on the decommissioning end of it, there has to be a decommissioning plan submitted. Now, they've submitted a plan, but the ordinance clearly contemplates that it shall include a description of the manner in which the permittee will ensure that it has the financial capability to carry out the decommissioning and restoration. There's been nothing submitted. We have two limited liability companies, and as lawyers, we know why you have limited liability companies, is to limit your liability. We don't know what the cost of decommissioning is going to be. And there have been, and I also submitted to Mr. Anderson, documentation from other jurisdictions where there's serious issues raised about how do you dispose of these solar panels? Can you put them in a landfill? Are they subject to hazardous waste regulations because they contain mercury and cadmium and other hazardous chemicals? So the point being is we submit that as a condition of issuing this permit, Cherry Creek Solar should submit to the county commission and to the joint bodies here what the cost of decommissioning is going to be. Now, we know in this state that there's been any number of failed enterprises that either got started or got kind of built or mostly built, and Northern Beef in Aberdeen is an example of it, and there it sits. So what do you do if this thing and I understand you're not in the business of determining the financial viability of it, but the problem is you got 100 acres of solar panels out there that if something goes wrong, the South Dakota PUC doesn't regulate them because their regulatory limits stop at has to be 100 megawatts before they have any jurisdiction. So who's going to get stuck with the cost of taking this thing down if it gets half built, partly built, completely built, or for some reason there's nobody around at the end to take it apart? It's my understanding in some of the submissions to the planning and zoning that there was an issue about Cherry Creek's going to be the lessee and some other entity's going to be the landowner. Well, who is Geronimo going to have another entity that's going to, another LLC that's going to own the land and lease it to Cherry Creek? And they proposed an escrow agreement between those two entities. We submit that there should be a bond or a surety, which is can be required under your ordinance. And the surety, if you want to put it in place with Minnehaha County as the obligee, just like a performance bond would work, then Minnehaha County can access those funds if it has to decommission this project. So we think there should be a condition in place to that effect. And maybe it's too onerous to require them to post the full amount of the bond at the beginning, but if they gradually, maybe it could be done in increments, where if they get a fourth of it done or a half of it done, they post a fourth or a half of it at that point, and then when it's completed, post the full amount of the bond, so that if something happens, somebody's going to be stuck taking this thing apart. I mean, at the last meeting of this body, there was a question, what if there's a hailstorm and all this stuff's busted up, what are you going to do? So that's an issue. The other thing is, we think there's questions in the staff recommendation that there's a provision in the ordinance that allows the county to hire an expert. If there's technical expertise required that the Planning and Zoning Commission doesn't have, you can hire a technical expert and charge the applicant for the cost of that. Now, there's been a staff recommendation says there won't be any reflection of any kind on adjacent property. Well, how was that determined? Based on what type of solar panels? Based on what evidence? Then the other recommendation, it says at a minimum the petitioner should be held accountable for any damages to public or private lands and roads. Well, how is that going to be determined? How is it going to be enforced? What screening is screening going to actually be required, or is it recommended? It wasn't included in the last time this body met and approved this. And then there was another staff recommendation said it would be difficult to determine the amount of noise generated from the transmission lines or transformers. Says who? I mean, I don't know what scientific evidence or study has been done to establish that. The other issue has to do with the roads, the dirt, dust, mud, and that. 468th Avenue, so you know, on the borders of south side of this property, is a township road maintained by Delapre Township. As you know, a lot of townships split the road, and Wayne might take the west half of that, but this section of that road is maintained by Delapre Township, which is a township in Lincoln County. What authority does this body have to require the hard surfacing of that, or the maintenance of it? So those are questions that we have. I think the bottom line is that we, the adjoining landowners, have concern about being the guinea pigs for an entity that's never established or built one of these before. Obviously, everybody knows that, you know, solar energy is probably a good thing, but is this the right place for it? Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Schaefer?
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schaefer, I do understand and appreciate the issues you have with the recent creation of the corporation, but is this the wrong land to use? I mean, is this not in the sunshine?
I think it's the wrong land because it's, as Mr. Heinhold pointed out, it's right butting up against, close to Sioux Falls, and it's midway between the Country Acres estates, which I think is, 75, 80 homes over there. It's an area that's clearly, I think, going to be developed over time. You know, you've got a landfill that sits west of there. That would be a perfect place to put a solar energy farm, I would think, and it would be compatible with that.
Thank you.
Is there someone else that would like to speak to this matter?
My name is Dan Hine. I have the property exactly right on the very east edge of this. I did see a copy of a landscaping plan which shows no landscaping on the west half of my property at all. At least the one I saw anyway. I mentioned that in the last plan that I saw, I can't remember the guy's name from Geronimo, but Burmeister, yep, he had mentioned a 300-foot setback from my property, and the last plan I saw was 90 feet. With the fence line right on the property line. No buffer between the property line and the fence line. Additionally, one of the things they talked about before was 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on top of it. My understanding from the zoning ordinances are that no more than a 6-foot fence is allowed in that district. It could only be in commercial and industrial where more than a 6-foot fence is allowed. A couple other things talk about in the ordinance for if somebody wanted to put up a gravel pit. My understanding in section 1514, there needs to be a 1,000-foot buffer from a gravel pit. Yet here, the fence line's right on my property line, no buffer. Further in the ordinance with the gravel pit, talks about implementing earth berms. The berm should be constructed before any extraction of rock and gravel. For wireless communication towers, it says if there's a fence adjacent to residentially or residentially used or zoned property, natural materials shall be used for fence screening. If chain link fencing is needed for safety and security, additional landscape screening shall be required outside the chain link fence to screen public view of telecommunication sites. I guess these are some of the things, being so close to the property, that I think some of these things need to be addressed before we grant this conditional use permit. Thank you.
Mr. Burmeister, I understand that you have a grove of trees on the far,
Oh, me?
yes.
Yeah.
Or I'm sorry,
Hine.
Mr. Hine.
Yes, I do.
But you have a grove of trees on the far.
Yep, and they're
west side
hundreds of years
property.
old and very thin, and I can see right through them right now.
Okay.
But that,
But
in
you
my
have
opinion,
some screening.
I have some trees, but in my opinion, my property line is my property line, whether there's any trees or not. They should supply screening from their material. No different than anybody else's property line.
Yes.
Would you show me which home is your property?
Yeah, it's right on where that little jog out is on the east side.
The lower one or the upper?
The upper one, the one that basically right there. The back of my property would be right on their fence.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Related to this gentleman's testimony, I have a question for staff, if you don't mind. Not in regards to this conditional use, but as ag land, my understanding is you could have buffalo there, which are kind of ornery animals and some pretty significant fences. Are there setbacks and restrictions on fences for ag uses as it is?
No,
No restrictions on location, size, or type?
not for ag fences, no.
Okay, just checking. Thank you. Any other testimony?
I'll hand them out for you. That'd be great, Chip. You gonna need that, Elmo?
Good evening. My name is Vince Jones. I'm an attorney at Woods Fuller here in Sioux Falls. I represent Seven Mountains Capital Management LLC, which owns the quarter immediately to the east of the proposed site. I worked with Mr. Schaefer, and I'll attempt to avoid repeating myself with him, despite my occupation. I'm also a God-fearing man, so I'll try to keep the pen in the short. My points are primarily focused on 4 issues. First, the proposal is not compatible with the considerations provided in Article 19.47 of the Joint Regulations. There's going to be a significant diminution in value to surrounding landowners, including my client. It's better suited elsewhere, and the applicant hasn't provided sufficient information to this joint commission or the public about the impact of the site. Now, regarding the impact of the site, my clients are not just some faceless LLC. This property was purchased many years ago by Alan Bodie with the purpose of eventual development in mind. He's been a good steward of the land. And now, just when development is becoming a reality, it faces frustration from the application that's under consideration today. There's no doubt that a solar installation of this nature is going to affect the property. It's going to affect all the surrounding property. Ultimately, people don't want to live by these things. They're ugly, they're glare, and the buffering is not going to solve it, at least not the buffering that I've heard described so far. If the applicant disagrees, then where's the glare study? I mean, they say, oh, it doesn't glare. Well, I mean, I've seen these things around. If you do a Google search on solar installations, there's one that was installed in Minnesota by St. John's University. Well, I went to school there. It's about 200 yards from where I lived, and looks like it glares to me. So, I mean, show us some information, show us some examples, show us that it's not going to glare. I haven't seen anything like that. Show us some evidence. In the course of my client's investigation of this application, we've prepared a land analysis, and I've passed that out. It's included in these materials. We think that shows approximately what the diminution in value would be. As you can see on the second page of the analysis, the approach used was to determine the value of the property as an agricultural use, which is all we think that it's going to be good for once the installation is in place, at least a portion of it. Second, we estimated the price based on development property, which we hope to do and have hoped to do for a long time. It's our investment-backed expectation. So on page 3, you can see the comparable sales of agricultural property that we looked at in the area, and the idea was to come up with an average of comparable sales. Page 4 indicates that the average sale price is between $8,000 and $8,500 per acre for agricultural property. Now on page 5, we pulled several comparable sales of development land, which is all, looks like it's all near the joint jurisdiction territory. We recognize that the land is not quite ready for development yet because there's no sewer run out to it. There's infrastructure issues. If it was, it would be substantially more valuable. However, we think that it's going to be sewerable within 5 to 10 years, and that's based on some investigation that we did with the city, and there's some reference to that in the materials as well. So it's not unrealistic to say that it could be sewerable in 5 to 10 years. This means the property has great potential for development. And I'll get to the development that's happened so far here in a moment. But as you can see on page 6, we think the land has a value of $15,000 to $17,000 per acre. Presently, we think that's conservative because it's going to, the diminution in value will become more apparent as development approaches. Property value goes up and the usefulness of the buffer area goes down. Now, on page 7, you can see that we indicate we think a portion of my client's property will be undevelopable because no one will want to develop residential neighborhoods next to an installation like this. Commissioner Barth, you asked about why this place, what's wrong with this place. Well, if you look at the maps and you look at the materials that I provided in the application, I mean, you can see the vast majority of the development that's happened and is happening in that area is residential. It's residential area. So we think that 40 to 60 acres is going to be rendered less valuable or undevelopable. We think this is an estimate that's reasonable based on the amount of property line that's shared with the applicant property, the description they provide of the installation and its minimal screening, and current trends and setbacks and buffer zones in the Sioux Falls area. So if you look at the difference between the development value and the agricultural value, our conclusion is that our client's property, and depends, there's other properties here that share longer property line, but our client's property is going to be negatively affected presently by about $500,000. And again, we think that's conservative, and we think that discrepancy is going to be much greater as in 5 to 10 years when that property is sewerable. again, the concern primarily is the proximity of this installation to what has been, up to this point, a largely residential development area. We believe that trend will continue. Why is this here? Mr. Schaefer kind of stole one of my points here. The Sioux Falls Municipal Landfill is a mere 4 to 5 miles to the west of this place. This project is supposedly associated with Xcel Energy, and it's supposed to develop electricity. Well, there's a brand new Xcel Energy electrical substation, the Wall Lake substation, that's going in practically across the street from the landfill. So you've got infrastructure, you've got existing use of the land that's much better suited to an installation such as this out there. Why here? We've also included some information related to notice that my client has got from the pipeline people. You've heard a little bit about that, but we don't know where that's going to be. I haven't seen that addressed in the materials to much degree. What's going to happen if there's a pipeline through this? We really don't know. The commission is supposed to examine other negative factors according to the joint regulations, and factors not related to noise, which I don't think they've quantified at all, traffic, air pollution. There's a generic other negative factors in subsection C of Article 19.07. I have to say, my clients are not satisfied with the amount or the type of screening that's been discussed. Corn isn't tall for most of the year. Lots of other crops aren't tall ever. Grass is not as tall as this fence or the solar panels that they're describing. It's tall as a man's body, taller than some like me. Mr. Schaefer elaborated on other negative factors. At the end of the day, this proposed use should not negatively, adversely affect the public, and I think the issues we've raised today show that we know or we suspect a lot more negatives about the property and this proposed location of this substation or this installation than we do about the positives. There's more questions than answers. Until they can clearly reassure us that the public is not going to be adversely affected by this installation, then the permit shouldn't be granted, and we should look into the type of conditions that need to be imposed in order to make it practical and protect the public. So for these reasons, my clients urge you not to grant this permit.
Any questions from Mr. Jones from the city side?
Yes. You're basing, there's a letter in here saying that they have no idea if there's going to be a loss of land value from the Board of Equalization. But you're saying you know more than he does and that it is going to be a loss in value?
Sir, we had a land analysis performed by people that we consider to be experts. They looked at the land values in the area, and that's the conclusion that we came to.
Okay. So if someone else brought it up and said that there's none, I mean, you had another expert say that he can't do it. That's why I'm getting at is the fact that you're saying it because you're, how am I saying this? How do you know that for sure that there's going to be a loss of land value?
Well, because
you're speculating, right?
Well, we're speculating based on the evidence that we've seen and investigated. We know there's glare. We haven't been reassured that there's not going to be glare here. We've looked at the examples that we've seen on the ground. As Mr. Schaefer pointed out, we've seen that there's evidence of trouble with the installations that are proposed in Minnesota. It appears that their relationship with Xcel Energy is deteriorating. So, and we also, they also think this is not the right place for this. We've got some evidence that we think.
Excuse me, Mr. Jones. They were last time when they were here. They got up and told us why it is exactly the right place. So again, you feel that it's one way, and they're quite confident that the landfill isn't the right place. So I can appreciate that that's the people that you represent, that's their view on it. But likewise, the petitioner has a view that's counterintuitive to what you're saying as well. And I guess as far as it relates to the land values, you're asking us to handcuff a current landowner for the next 15 to 20 years based on speculation that the people that you represent may 5 years, may 10 years, may 15 years develop that land. When currently there is no plan to do so. Well, there's a current landowner with the plan, and he's making his petition. And really what we're here to really talk about is land use. It is a solar substation is allowed under agricultural land, and we have seen a wide variety of substations come before the Planning Commission in the last 10 years. They're within the city limits, and yes, they're not to this size, but relative to the neighborhoods that they're in, the screening is less than the screening that they're getting here. So I think to say that you speculate that the land values will be devalued, you're speculating that there's no glare. Well, they do have studies to say that there is no glare. They didn't present them this time because they presented them in full last time. But they do have counterpoint to everything that you have said thus far. Would be my point.
I appreciate that, but we think we've got evidence that there will be diminution, and it's my responsibility to put that in the record.
That I can appreciate.
Any other questions for Mr. Jones from the commission? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I'd like to see what Diane Jew come up with. I got a question for you because you represent the city. Maybe you can't answer this.
I'll let you know if I can.
You stated that within 5 years, sewer was going to be out into this vicinity. Have you heard of anything to that effect?
That's the first I've heard of that, and that's based on engineering public works opinion that was written in with what Mr. Jones presented.
Okay, and he got it from them that they would be out there
Correct.
within
It
5
was,
years?
I think it was noted that it was Ryan Johnson.
Okay,
Yes.
because I didn't have time to read the whole thing word for word, so
It
that's
would
why
have
I was
been in what
asking the
he
question.
just passed out,
Yeah, this piece
and
that
again,
he-
that's the first that I had seen that information as well.
Okay,
Anything else?
no, that's it.
Is there anyone else with some new perspective that they'd like to present?
Yeah, good evening. My name is Randy Shaw, and I would like to speak with you. I'll promise to take about 5 minutes. I'm speaking on behalf of 30 different landowners, and I've got a short PowerPoint here. In the interest of time, I won't go through all the slides. We didn't have that many to begin with, but first of all, I'd like to say that my address is right across the street to the south. First of all, I want to thank all the commissioners that devote so much time to the first-class city that we have here in Sioux Falls and to Minnehaha County. I think all of us realize that Minnehaha County and Sioux Falls is the envy of South Dakota, if not throughout the Midwest. The landowners that we're talking about, if I could have them stand to be recognized, because I want to assure you I'm not just speaking on my own behalf. We've had neighborhood meetings, but if I could have the landowners stand and be recognized that are part of this discussion. I'd like to talk about a few points. To first of all state that we're definitely in favor of alternative energy sources. We realize that green energy is a way that things that we need to look forward to. We've all seen wind energy farms. We also recognize that solar energy is in its infancy. I'll fast forward through some of these in the interest because I know some of them have already been raised. But I'd like to point out a few things that I know were brought up by Mr. Burmeister in terms of meeting with landowners, continuing to meet with landowners on issues. I live right across the road from it. I've had one 10-minute meeting with Jordan Burmeister. When we originally got the letter back in August, I called Cherry Creek, Geronimo. It took 2 weeks before anybody got back to me. We've had one 10-minute meeting where he met with myself, my neighbor, to talk about screening. We told him our concerns about the visual impact of the solar panels. And I'll give you a visual of what's been proposed so far. But the information that's came back hasn't been a good feel for first impressions. I realize that first impressions can be hard to, you have to overcome those and you have to keep an open mind, and we've certainly tried to do this. And I'll point to three things. One is, we first of all heard that the trees would harm the efficiency of the solar panels because of shading concerns. We can't have trees close to solar panels. Well, it turns out there's 500 to 600 feet. I think all of us realize that there's no tree within 500 feet that's going to cause a shading concern. There's also talk about the fact that, well, let's start 500 to 600 feet from the south border to be a good neighbor. Actually, they're doing that due to drainage issues, not because of their own concern about adjoining property values. And then we heard about the experience with many solar panel projects, and I know there's been issues brought up on that. But again, to reiterate, Cherry Creek and certainly Geronimo has never built a project like this. With any first-time ventures, I don't know about you, but the first time I've raised my child in my life, first time I've done things in my business, I haven't always done the best job. And I learn as I go along, and I think that's certainly true for projects like this. Here's a visual of a substation that we took a picture of. It happens to be out in Brandon, but has some very great shading around it that provides some good things. And I'm not sure, do you have a picture in the front? Yeah, very good. Yeah. But here's what they're proposing essentially is 18-inch cedar trees. I think you can recognize that 18-inch cedar trees certainly provide no visual impairment to anything that you're looking at. And you'll notice some little sticks there in the middle. That's the Amer maples that they're referring to, that they're proposing to plant. The cost of these, I'm aware, they talk about surrounding the whole property. There's actually only lilacs on the north and west side. And Mr. Hine, who lives north of me, talked about the fact that they're not even proposing building anything, planting anything close to there. This is a $25 million project. These trees would probably cost around $20,000. That's 0.1%. Let's recognize the fact that they only proposed these after the appeal was filed. So up until the time that the appeal was filed, they weren't even willing to come to landowners like me to talk about what screening would be favorable to us or what would be desirable to us. I mean, you're only talking about increasing the cost 0.1%. That's not any sizable cost that should cause any bit of concern for a $25 million project. I'll end with the fact that here's the Slayton, Minnesota picture of that. Again, that's only a 10-acre project. It certainly wasn't built by Geronimo or Newer Cherry Creek. You can see a glare there. I talked to a resident that lived right to the south of that. She said every morning, yes, there is a glare. They'll talk to the fact that there's solar panels close to airports. How can there be a glare? I'll tell you, when I'm driving down a road at night and someone has their bright lights shining on me, that's a glare to me. I know it's not a glare to an airplane hovering up above in the sky. So I would have a little bit of a counter to that point that just because there's panels around airports that there obviously is no glare, that doesn't make any sense to me. But again, I'm a layman, and maybe I just don't understand the technicalities like they do. We don't really feel there's one positive impact to any neighboring properties in this area. We would end with, we're in favor of building alternative energy solutions, but let's experiment somewhere outside of South Dakota. Let's don't do a first-time project here in the great county of Minnehaha, and certainly within 1 mile of the city limits of Sioux Falls. And let's build prudent and reasonable sized farms. And on behalf of the 30 landowners that I'm talking about, we have an average landowner's lifespan of around 12 to 15 years there. We've been great tenants of that property, and we love that area. And we would seriously ask you to disapprove the conditional use permit.
Any questions? Yes.
Those are excellent comments. Mr. Shaw, not every project is going to benefit the neighbors, but I guess my question is, what could they do that would make this project better for you and the neighbors? What could they do that would make it more palatable? What could they do to calm some of your concerns?
Yeah, I think there's really three main areas. Scale down the project. Let's make sure we learn how solar panels really work on agricultural land, because again, this is their first time doing anything like this. Why do I want to trust them to build 100 acres? Why do I want them to trust them when it took so long for them to come to me and propose even 0.1% increase in their project cost? Why should I trust them to have judgment to repair the road? So one is to scale it down. Two is to provide more adequate screening. 18-inch trees do not screen one thing. The size of this microphone is 18 inches. It's certainly not blocking your view of me. And these panels are 10 to 12 feet high. They're going to be seen for miles around. And three, let's work together. I find a lot of value in meeting people face to face. When I come here with you folks, I see real people on the Planning Commission. I see real people on the city and county side. I've had a chance to see Jordan and his associate, and I've met Jordan one time. And when people work together face to face, they can accomplish a lot. But when they're not willing to do that, when they're not willing to come forward, I've contacted them several times. I talked to Mr. Heino. He knows my name really well, I'm sure, through emails, and it's good to see him face to face and work together like that.
Thank you. Other questions?
One last. How many meetings did Mr. Burmeister refuse with you then?
Refuse or be proactive to initiate?
I'm hearing that he's not. We had one 10-minute meeting and that was it.
Yeah.
And then you kind of led the witness that you were being refused contact.
We've had probably 6 neighborhood meetings. We've invited him to at least one of those that he has not attended. I've been told through Mr. Heinem that the Planning and Zoning Board that Geronimo, Cherry Creek, they do not communicate directly to the landowners, and that information needs to be pushed forward through the government. So at that point, then I was working solely with Mr. Heinem.
We typically like the applicant to work with the neighboring landowners.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And again, face-to-face is invaluable.
Any other questions? Thank you for your time.
Yeah, thank you.
We'll take one more, and we're going to try and wrap it up.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Kent Bronzer. I also live adjacent to this property on the south border. I only have one thing, because I've been to all these meetings, and the people here spoke or represented things really well. The only thing I want to point out, and this may bring some, opposition, however you want to put it, but I just want to caution the size of the project. I really, and I know we're only here to speak about this 140 acres, but I want to point out that it was stated in an Argus Leader article interview where Scott Anderson did an interview. He stated that this project would be 300 acres. Excuse me, 300 acres. So I would like to caution, where will this go from here? Because that statement was made for a reason. We don't know why. We don't know what the workings behind it is, but it was made. It's in the article. You can go to the Argus and search it, and you'll find it on July 23rd. I would just submit that possibly there's a fact that the same property owner who owns this property also owns the adjacent property, 160 acres to the west. Klein's Properties owns that one as well. 140 plus 160, let's see, that equals 300. So I know we're not here to talk about that piece of property, but the concern is if one piece of property goes in that way, it becomes a much more shoe-in for other adjacent properties to follow suit in the same manner. Now you're looking at a massive, 140 acres is massive. You potentially could be looking at a massive 300-acre parcel of land out there with nothing but glaring solar panels on it. Thank you.
Last call for new and unique, different opposition. Yes.
I would just have one other comment, and it's kind of been touched on as far as the surety bond and as far as technical support. This is the first one of these we've ever done. We're no experts. I'm assuming you guys are not experts. I would more caution. Let's take a step back, maybe get some other experts. We talk about tests about solar. They said they don't glare, but I didn't see no tests from the first, when we had this first meeting a couple months ago. They said they didn't glare, just like this guy said they do glare. I haven't seen no technical tests. Why don't we have that? More soil tests, maybe we need some more experts to test on the land value. Like I said, we're not experts. I think caution is at a paramount. You know, have a bond, make sure that they can take care of the problem.
With the applicant, we've heard a lot of opposition. I give the applicant one chance to rebut or make any additional comments.
Good evening. I am Tina Reitel with Geronimo Energy. Wow, there's quite a bit to respond to. I will start with the decommissioning. We agree. As the ordinance requires financial surety, we're happy to provide that once it's been constructed as required by the ordinance. We have left that type of requirement open as different financiers have different ways of providing that kind of financial surety. So different ones will have a letter of credit, other ones will prefer escrow accounts, whatever it might be. But providing financial surety is something that we do, that we will do, that is required by the ordinance. So that has not been overlooked by Geronimo or Cherry Creek Solar. Let's see. A little bit. I'll let Jordan talk a little bit about the screening plans, particularly because he's been working primarily with the landowners on that and the neighbors on that. There was one edit that we needed to bring up, is that the 300 feet from Mr. Hines' property is 300 feet from his house. So that's a clarification. From his property, it's probably more around 100 feet. That's where the panels would start. The fence line would, actually we now have a landscape plan that includes a visual buffer there, so those would be on the property line, and then the fence would be behind that. So that's a clarification there, because we did hear from the county that was a concern, because initially we had, there are trees there, so we had assumed that would be sufficient, and we heard that was a concern, so we added that in. We submitted that to staff, so I don't know if it's in your packet or not, but that landscape plan has been added. We heard the community loud and clear that there needed to be a visual buffer, so that's what we did. And then there's various different types of plantings that were in there. I'm assuming you have it in front of you. You can take a look. In terms of noise, I heard that there was a lot of concern about noise, especially from the power lines. Now, the power lines are the exact same lines that they currently use running to your house, running in front on your streets, running buried on your streets. Same line. A little more complicated when you ask about can it be used for something else. It can be used for something else, but it depends on who owns the line and kind of where that territory lies. But it is not something that it is something that can be used in a different manner. It's the same exact technology, same line, same cables as you would use to run a line to a development, for example. And I'm not quite sure what the noise. If you stand under a regular 34.5 kV line, it's going to sound the same, which is, as far as I'm concerned, virtually noiseless. So you can take a look at that. In terms of glare, we have the panels are built in a way to absorb as much light as possible. Now, virtually no glare is not correct. Everything has some sort of glare. So I just want that to be clear. I don't want you to think that we're saying there is absolutely nothing, no sun, nothing will ever be reflected off of these. They are built to absorb as much light as possible. There are on metal frames, just like your car is metal, probably high. It's actually, if you look at the reflectivity of solar panels, it is less than corn. So you can kind of, there's a different spectrum of how you want to look at that. And I can send you those studies, I can send you the information, but just as an assurance, there are over 250,000 solar systems in the United States. This is not a new technology. It's not that solar doesn't work. It's not that this is an experiment. We don't take these types of developments lightly. They are expensive. They are power plants. They do require they do require a lot of due diligence in ensuring that everything is in line, and it's not something that we experiment with. There was a conversation about interconnection application or interconnection agreement earlier on. We will not have a project without an interconnection agreement. So if you want to put that on as a condition, that's fine. We are not going to build without one. So it's kind of, you don't really have to put it on there from our perspective. We can't build without one. So, but if you want to put that on there, that's.
I believe it's part of the ordinance anyway.
Yeah, and it is required prior to construction. But I wanted just to be clear, so you understand that we're not building without having someone who can buy the energy. Let's see. And I just wanted to touch on the official information going through the county before it goes to landowners. I wanted to clarify that any kind of questions that we receive in regards to the ordinance, specifically to the ordinance, we requested that goes through the county, particularly just because of the legal situation that has arisen since the first public hearing back here, 2 months ago, or a month ago, 2 months ago. So with that, any specific questions that we received associated to anything with the ordinance, we filtered that through the county. And then I will let Jordan come up and talk a little bit about some of the landscaping plans and some of his interactions with the landowners. But actually, one more point before I get into that. We did look at the comprehensive plan, and the property further east is within the 16 to 25 years to development. So we are further west from that, further out from that. So that is another just good example of why we have located it where we've located it. It's outside of the long-term expansion plan. And I will not really touch on the points with our relationship with Excel. It is a very complicated issue that has been going on for 2 years, and I don't think the summary you received today is accurate under any notion, but I will not get into that, but I did want to make that statement because it's not as simple as what was presented today. And then Jordan, if you want to share that information, and then we can take questions.
Thank you, Commissioners. Again, I just wanted to make sure that, as far as communicating with the neighboring landowners, as Mr. Shaw had mentioned, it's been limited. Going way back to the very beginning, we did send out that original letter back in August. Got minimal response. I do remember Mr. Shaw did call. There was some lag there in getting back to him as well, but that was not to ignore his concerns or anything like that. But after the last hearing, there obviously was some concern about screening and landscaping. So we did come together. I met with 3 of the neighboring landowners, Kent Brownsreither, Mr. Shaw, and then also Wayne Larson as well. Wayne Larson then provided us with an example of some type of screening plants from his business as a tree farm, so that we presented that in more of a formalized document. And with them being smaller, they are going to grow approximately a foot a year. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but as far as that goes, there are 3 rows that are going to be growing with full foliage after a few years here. And for us to plant 100 and some 6-foot trees, is very substantial for a project. So I just wanted to clarify that as well. But I just want to make sure that it was clear that I have communicated with landowners via phone calls or in-person meeting on that. As far as the specifics of the plan, the southeastern and the southern plan does have 3 rows: eastern red cedars, amber maples, and the common lilac, and then the remaining perimeter of the rest of the project perimeter, where there's no home sites directly adjacent around it. It's 1 row of lilacs around the perimeter. so it provided some additional landscaping for those closer home sites around the eastern and southern.
Mr. Chairman, regarding that, like on our ag projects, we tend to put in one row of os willows in there because they grow 4 feet a year, and they're very drought, as 2012 proved, they're very drought tolerant. So like in 4 years, you have a 16-foot tall tree or more. And why aren't you considering like one row of those in conjunction with your other trees?
Yeah, I mean,
that's what's common in the, we've done it quite often in the ag when they're screening lagoons and that type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to, work with the final height of it, of course, to make sure that it's not shading our panels. But this is, a proposal. It doesn't have to be exactly these species of trees. This is what Mr. Larson provided, so that gives us an example to work with through him as well.
Mr. Burmeister, am I hearing that you'd be amenable to working to increase the screening and pasture growing trees and those types of things?
As far as within reason, we want to make sure that as far as cost of the project, if there are some faster growing species, that won't get too tall for the operation of the project. That may be a possibility, but just wanted to mention that.
Okay. Anything else?
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
This is Otter.
We can hear you.
Okay. How do you respond to the concerns that Geronimo is a newbie in this regard and that you're not really experienced in putting up a project of this size?
What, Tina? That.
I think this question goes back to the fact that we've done wind, obviously, we've done that very successfully, significantly more complicated than solar. On our team, the Slayton project was designed by our director of solar, so he did all the engineering on that. He owns and operates the St. John Solar Farm, so that is his project that he owns. He developed, he built, he added on just recently. So if you drive by, you'll see there are more solar panels there, fixed tilt instead of tracking this time. He also did the convention center rooftop, and those are basically the three. There's a couple. I think IKEA's got one. Those are the 3 solar farms in Minnesota, and he's done those. And prior to that, even while he was doing these Minnesota ones, he also built hundreds and designed hundreds of solar farms in California, Arizona. I mean, we are not. Our solar farms are not something we take lightly. They're obviously cost a lot of money as well. So we don't, when we go to a financer, they are looking for every single possible detail, every single risk. If you don't have that in mind, then you don't get a financer and you don't get a project. So we make sure that we do that. And things are complicated, yeah, in a regulatory process, very complicated. So that's kind of my response, but I do like to focus a little bit on how a lot of these questions surround the technology, how it's an experiment. And this 10 megawatt solar site is a tiny project in the scope of solar world. I'm not saying that is diminishes anything anybody else has said about it, but in the terms of the solar industry, this is not a significantly large project.
Thank you.
Anyone else? At this point, I'm going to close the floor for testimony and turn to, I guess we should probably have a motion so that we can have some discussion.
I'll look for a motion on this.
Motion to approve for discussion.
I'll move approval.
A second for discussion.
For discussion.
Motion and a second to get discussion going to approve. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those same sign?
All those in favor, signify by saying yes.
Yes.
Opposed?
Are we not going to discuss it?
No, that was for, I thought, just to get the discussion.
Okay, good. Okay.
Motion for discussion.
I'll frame it.
As I took it, not approval. So, please. Now, while we're discussing, this is my first time around the track on this one. I was absent 2 months ago. And I guess I'd just say that I like solar a whole lot better than I like wind. we think these things are necessary. We're dealing with a land use issue here. I was quick to point out that as an ag use, you could have some pretty intrusive uses for the neighbors here that wouldn't even be in front of us, commission. So conditional use gives us a lot of opportunity to do some things. You might want to tar and feather me, fellow commissioners, but I'm kind of the opinion that I'd like to hear more about the landscaping plan, because I do think that the residential development is what will proceed this direction. And I didn't hear enough enthusiasm about fixing this landscaping plan from the applicant, candidly. And while we normally delegate this responsibility of reviewing the landscaping plan to our planning director, I'd almost suggest that we usurp that authority and ask for a detailed plan and presentation in a subsequent meeting when we can hear maybe a little bit more about glare at the same time. That's what I'd throw out.
I would agree. I think the landscaping plan is probably inadequate, and I think the trees are small.
Yeah, you need to be on all sides and tall.
I would just like to see better detail. I mean, I know this is quite detailed, but I think it doesn't reflect the concerns that landowners have.
Yeah.
It's my take on it.
Any discussion here on the city side? Sean, you had some conversation last time as it related to landscaping. And we ended up passing it without a landscaping requirement last time. So has that changed any of your questions or concerns with what you have seen tonight?
I think this appears to be moving in the right direction with trying to increase the landscape units and trying to do more screening. Looking at 18-inch bushes, shrubs that will eventually be trees, I think is not an immediate screening, obviously, but it is a move in the right direction. Some more mature trees along those lines of screening the vision to the neighbors would be favorable.
And that could certainly address the eyesore nature of this plan. But you can take it from me and my missus as my witness. Electrical infrastructure has very little demeaning value to real estate property values. If what I personally witnessed recently on the west side of Sioux Falls has anything to say about it. 19th and Sertoma is a very, very, in my opinion, ugly substation, and property values in all cardinal directions from that place are just moving. They are.
Mr. Chair, I certainly don't think this is going to look as bad as a substation. I have seen solar collectors. I've not seen one this size. Yeah. But I think that clearly the neighbors, I think they do need a little bit more assurance on the screening and stuff. I think the criticisms of the business plan have nothing to do with it. I mean, if they are crazy enough to build a facility that's going to put them broke, that's not our problem. Our problem is to approve them trying to. We need to make provision for people to do business in this county.
And as long as there's assurances that it can be decommissioned, which are a requirement in the ordinance.
So I would agree that we need to have more communication with the neighbors. And I tell you, I was involved in this. We almost had a TIF or a project for an ethanol plant up north of Sherman.
Yeah,
we took a bus to Granite Falls to look at an ethanol plant up there to see what it was like. And all the neighbors were on the bus, and it's important to communicate fully, and it's not always possible, but as best we can. And I think it's not the wrong use for this land. It needs to be. We need to alleviate the concerns of the neighbors, though.
Same thinking. It's not the wrong use. It just needs to be minimized in terms.
And I would challenge the developers of the nearby acreage. Would they want to preserve this land in a pristine condition to allow the pipeline to go through? Is that their argument there?
Also, if we were to lean towards a final motion to maybe defer this thing or ask for it to come back, the applicant has indicated that they've got all kinds of data on glare. I'd like to see that and have it made some comparisons. She said, does it wear as much as corn? I'm not, okay. My experience is, there's things like loss meters and those types of things. Let's understand some of that data and what kind of glare we really have.
Well, if I may.
Yes.
Obviously the next step would be for it to go to a joint session of the council and the commission. And I think, maybe we just encumber the applicants with the duty of bringing a better proposal for that thing. And I would ask, I guess, Scott Anderson what he thinks, if that might be possible, or if...
Well, I don't like the idea of I don't like the idea of telling the applicant to work something out before it gets to the joint county commission. I mean, if we're going to continue it, I think we need to. I think this is a better forum.
Medium-sized bucks that we do.
Well, yeah, but I think this is going to be a better forum for interaction between the public and the applicants and you than at an elected board.
My only additional thing to add with that is that as it relates to land use, is this a good piece of property for a solar farm? The glare, I don't know if that's within our purview really. Certainly I think the landscaping is part of our purview, and we can continue to ask for some continued landscaping addition. But I really think the glare is outside of maybe what we're supposed to look at. And like I said before, in meaning no disrespect, I know that their view is going to change, and that's very bothersome, and I can completely understand that. But the reality is, our consumption of energy, most of you have been there over 12 years, and you may have had 2 or 3 televisions, but now you may have 5 televisions and 3 phones and how many other electronic devices. And yes, we're getting to have some energy efficiency as it relates to that, but our overall consumption continues to rise on a regular basis. And I think that, like I said before, in my time on the commission, I have seen a significant number of substations come before us, and I can tell you that they're never welcomed into a neighborhood, but they're always needed in a neighborhood. And it will change your view, but I would have to agree with Kurt. I don't believe that in my time I've ever seen anything like this devalue a property. And we can only take the expertise of Department of Equalization, who has been in that position for a very long time and recently presented to the Sioux Falls Planning Commission about projects such as these and what the reality is about devaluation of property and what the speculation is as it relates to devaluation of a property. So while I'm very understanding that your view will change, I do personally feel that this is probably a pretty good use for a low impactful energy substation long term.
And I'm in agreement with Jesse on this also, that this is a good use for this land. Yeah, I'm agreeing that. Now I'm gonna say, how do we get change number 4 just a little bit? How do we change number 4, which is that a landscape plan be submitted prior to construction? I think if we change just that one a little bit, would you guys be acceptable to that? Because that's what you're talking about basically. Is
I don't know,
landscape.
it's been a long time. Years ago I was on the City Planning Commission, and you do final development plans, at least we did back in those days, and you'd get in there with the pencil and start marking up, this bush isn't big enough. I'm almost thinking to that level, and with respect, I think glare is like picking earth tone colors. I think there is some justification for taking a look at the level of glare and landscape plan in a little more detail. And I'm not, no disrespect to Scott at all, but I just didn't know if I want to put the burden on him to go through this at a level. If we passed a motion that I would vote for, just by strengthening number 4, it would have to be with landscaping on all sides that grows to a significant height. And I can't tell you what that is until I've had discussions about, we know these trees that are growing 4 feet a year that Wayne mentioned.
But then how does it affect the solar.
Candidly,
You get them
when
too
you get,
high.
you know,
That's
several
why-
100-foot setbacks, in whether they're setbacks or whether they're necessitated by drainage, when you have the room there, or if it's a requirement for decent development, it just shrinks the size of the project. It may affect the financial viability, which may require it to look elsewhere. That's my opinion on that.
As I look at that, you can talk about screening, and they're talking about the 500-foot setback on the south side of the property. That's where the houses are. And was a 75-foot setback from Township Road, Bonnie, as clerk? So you go back 5 feet from the road, you put in a 4-row shelter belt, 1 row of which is Os Willows, and you've got a screen that doesn't touch their solar panels on the south side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's not that difficult.
Well, and it looks currently, if you look at this plan, it looks like the screening is up to the panels themselves, and it would mean that they would have to move it out.
And it would have to be grassland once you test the homes and trees. That screens it very well.
The screen doesn't have to be right at the panels, it just needs a screen view of the panels.
Yep, yep.
So what's our motion, to defer till next month? Or do we-
It's your pleasure, folks. How would you like to dispose of it? And, we need a new
I
motion
agree
at
with
that point.
Steve on how can you adjust number 4.
That's it.
I think on the city side, we'd like to maybe change how number 4 reads and not go for a deferral, but.
I'm not relishing the idea of doing this again.
Well, and also it would end up being 2 months because we
Right.
don't meet in December.
Right, it'd have to be on there.
You know, so I'm in favor of doing something with 4 and moving forward.
Well, just if I throw this out, the applicant had proposed 3, wasn't it a row of amur, maples, 2 rows of cedars? Or was there a row? Why don't you just require a 4th row of taller trees that grow to a mature height of 40 to 60 feet?
I'm not a nursery person, but amber maples grow slow.
Yeah, they do.
You need 1 row of something that grows fast. You know, whether it's
We're
hospital.
going beyond and we're requiring more stuff for them.
And maybe we've had enough conversation that Scott gets it, right? Do we want screening on all sides, folks? If you're just fixing up item number 4.
Is it needed on the west?
Problem is the west and the north are the middle of the section. I mean, maybe eventually there'd be houses there, but.
I think there will be.
But
And that's one of the reasons I hesitate on the plan.
You're 10, 15 years late.
Yeah.
They'll know they're there.
Let me also say that if you're farming that piece north and you're in the shade, you don't like it. As simple as your corn doesn't like that.
I'm asking the question.
Is there adequate screening by that second house?
He said they added trees
Since this plan was given to us?
I think on the east and the south is all that we need at this point.
So is somebody prepared to bring forward a,
Wayne is usually our wordsmith.
and I would say Sean is our wordsmith. We'll let them have
Sean,
that
have
number
it.
4.
That's something that calls for 1 row of rapid growth trees. So.
Sean had some, I think, some good verbiage as to number 4.
I move approval of conditional use permit 14-44 on the series of 7 initial recommendations listed here by county staff, with the amendment of number 4, adding an additional row of fast-growing trees that are at a minimum height of 6 feet within 2 years. To recognize the need for a more immediate screening effect, and I think that'll cover it.
If I may, right now it says must be submitted, the city must be submitted and approved. I think that's probably just an oversight.
Fair enough, I would accept that modification.
That's my motion.
A second.
We have a motion and second to approve with stipulations. Any further discussion?
Any further discussion on the city side?
All those in favor say aye.
All those in favor
Aye.
signify by
All same
saying
sign.
yes.
The motion carries on the county
Show of
side.
hands. All those opposed? Motion passes on the city side.
Jesse, who seconded for the city?
What's that?
Who seconded for the city? Thank
2
you.
of them. Larry and then.
Oh, that's it.
Thank you.